Hello! So today I'm going to be talking about this Strange Eventful History by Messud. The thing is, I can tell you right now that this title is lying to you. There is nothing strange and there is nothing eventful about this novel. It's based around themes of separation, estrangement, and the impossibility of home for those who have been uprooted by colonialism. The novel spans 7 decades from 1940 to 2010. We follow the Cassar family, or it could be Cassar, I'm not too sure, but I'm going to go Cassar. So we follow the Cassar family as their lives are in a constant state of flux. They are separated during the chaos of World War II. They have to flee from a very complicated colonial homeland, and they are left completely without a homeland after Algerian independence. The story is primarily a family narrative. We focus on the patriarch Gaston and his wife Lucienne, whose kind of idolised love is really stifling to their children. It chronicles the lives of François and Denise, their children, whose lives are somewhat wrapped up in this family's peculiarities. We get details of François' marriage to Barbara, a woman whose background is so vastly and culturally different from his, which ultimately does leave too many difficulties between the two. We also follow their daughter Chloe, who is kind of intent on uncovering the sort of family secrets or these stories of the family's sort of lives in order to kind of bring peace to the family or a better understanding of her family. I would say out of all the stories, even though all of them have a little bit of darkness to them, this isn't exactly the best and most brilliant life this family has lived, although it is also sort of very similar and mundane to many people's lives. But out of them all, I would say Denise suffers with mental health and physical health, and just generally being a little bit of the black sheep of the family, the one who needs to be looked after, but also she is sort of very independent within herself and her views. But you know, her journey is probably, for me, the most interesting out of them all. This novel also spans continents, which is one of the more interesting aspects about it, how far and wide this family travels. We have Sydney, Buenos Aires, the Mediterranean French coast, and Connecticut. And again, it's this family trying to fit in within these different cultures, the different generations of this family trying to figure their way through how they fit within a different culture, a different country, how their children or their grandchildren are growing up in this different culture so vastly different from the one they knew but that no longer exists. Yet again, another thing that sort of makes this book fairly interesting. In the postscript of this novel, Messud talks about how actually a lot of this book is made up from her own experiences, her own family lineage. Now, this isn't the exact maths, but each section kind of jumps around about 10 years apart as we go through the 7 decades. It does do a little bit of jumping, and the characters do a little bit of reminiscing to sort of like past moments of their lives. But mostly, yeah, we are jumping around about 10 years each time we sort of switch between maybe the daughter, the son, the grandchild. This novel's main focus is on the interior lives of its characters, these small sort of mundane moments and these moments of reflection about their past lives. Sort of skipping over, or these things are taking place amidst sort of social and political paradigm shifts, but always keeping focused on the kind of like the small insular moments of this family. Because of this, many historical moments or just moments within this family's timeline are missed. Things like the Algerian War of Independence, Denise's suicide attempt due to heartbreak, the 2 years Francois spends in Paris separated from his wife studying, an alcoholic's journey to recovery, and also the courtship of Gaston and Lucienne, whose sort of marriage and love sort of permeates throughout this family as being the absolute pinnacle of what should be achieved within a kind of family unit, only to then be sort of twisted in this kind of sort of twist in the final pages. What we have is a novel that is made up of all the small moments in between these large moments, and all these large moments would probably serve as the main plot points in any other novel. And the reason they would serve as the main plot points in any other novel is because those are the things that are interesting. Some people will tell you that this novel is very clever because it has decided to sort of focus in on these in-between moments, not giving us these sort of major moments of action and only giving us any kind of clarity on things that have happened in the sort of final act when characters are kind of reflecting on what had happened to them. You're reading each chapter, and the entirety of the time you're reading that chapter, you're going, that's all great, but I can't stop thinking about the jump. I can't stop thinking about what happened in the in-between moment. And you know, and that's absolutely fine. That could be the novel's intention, but my God, is that boring. Now, people on this channel will be very bored of me saying how much I really love big, massive books, but why couldn't this book have been both and have been 1,000 pages? Make it a novel like War and Peace, in which we get all these small mundane moments that allow us to really connect and spend time with each of these characters, the different generations of kids. I would have loved that. I love novels like that. I'm not saying that what happens in this novel isn't really interesting in its individual sections, but it's its structuring and how it's decided to put those together and what it's chosen to ignore that makes it so utterly boring and really dull. If we could have a novel that had both, why couldn't we have a novel that has all of these things that it's missed and make it so vastly rich, make me really connect to these characters, as well as also being, a little bit entertained, as well as also taking some of the themes it's exploring and exploring them further, not just giving me something just so distanced. But apologies, I've already started talking about the things that I disliked about this novel, so let's just stop that there so I can do the normal structure that I do. Let's go into what did I like and what didn't I like. What I liked. I really enjoyed the writing style. Claire Messud is a fantastic writer. The way that it flows, the way that it moves, I really enjoyed the way it was written. And my final like is that in the second half of this novel, even though I'd been painfully bored up until that point, the second half of this novel, when it starts becoming a bit more self-reflective, when the pieces of the puzzle, and not that it's really set up as a sort of like puzzle type novel, but when things start coming together a little bit more, when we start to get a little bit more clarity over past events, when characters sort of reminisce and think about their lives, that stuff I found definitely more interesting than the first half. But other than that, that's all I liked. What didn't I like? So much. I'm just gonna sort of ramble at the camera right now, or maybe I might do some edits, we'll see. But the characters, I found the characters so insanely bland and boring. I just was bored to tears. What the novel is doing in its sort of structure, in its sort of jumping around, is every time we get sort of with a character and we feel like we're learning something about a character, we're getting some depth with them, we're connecting with them, it will jump. And that's sort of fine, but like, especially with Lucienne and kind of Gaston, like, we don't get much. They're meant to be this kind of like pinnacle of the family that sort of everything trickles down. And we get no time with them. We get just stuff at the beginning and then they just sort of completely evaporate. And then they're just told through the children's eyes. And again, all this could be intended. And some of you could be screaming at your screens right now going, that's the point, Andy. But that's fine if that's the point. But it's really bad for me, for my personal enjoyment. I found it awful. I was just so distanced from the characters. I couldn't connect to them in any way whatsoever because of the structuring. And then what also I disliked is the structuring at play. I would have rather a much bigger, much richer novel that included everything. I spent all of my time in the chapters I was on thinking about the stuff that we had missed. And that would have been okay if the entire novel jumped around loads. Like we spent the first half sort of like missing all these bits, and then the second half it goes back and fills in those gaps. And we get an even richer sort of sense of what actually did happen, mixed in with the reflection. Cool, that'd be a 5-star novel. That'd be amazing. But we don't get that. We just get some basic reflections on sort of things that sort of happen with no real clarity. And I'm just left going, well, I would have rather read that other book. I would have rather read all the other stuff. I also felt like the structure doesn't really do much to enrich the themes, the kind of sort of immigrant experience, that displacement, not having a home. It's sort of threaded throughout everything, and I will give Messud sort of like props for not throwing it in our face and sort of allowing that subtlety to play out through these kind of characters' lives. I do think that is done really well, and maybe I should have kept that on my likes. But because of the things that I'm missing, because of my experience being so dull and so boring, a lot of the themes of this novel are just not coming through. And again, I might just not have been in the right place to read this novel, in the right mindset. And maybe if I gave it another go, I might think differently. But actually, no, I don't think I would. It's not, as I said at the very beginning, it's not strange. There's nothing strange about these lives. I could go speak to anyone in the town I live in and they would have a similar family history to what has taken place within this. So many novels at the moment we're getting. What was that one? Oh, Restless Dolly Maunder? Restless Dolly Maunder, do you remember that one? In which she wrote about her grandmother's life. And I'm just going, that's an interesting exercise for you to do a fictionalised account of your grandmother's life. But it's boring. And there's not as much of a struggle there as you think. Or your life and your grandmother's life is not interesting. How about you just stick to fiction and make things interesting? Because as much as people might say like humanity and human lives are far more interesting than fiction, sometimes I go, it's all in the way you tell it. It's all in the way you tell it, because you can make the mundane really, really interesting. But sometimes you just go, that's not story worthy. That's not novel worthy. And I don't think this story, I don't know, maybe I've spent so much of my life surrounded by academics, theatre makers, storytellers, things like that. I've been really, really lucky and maybe very, very privileged to speak to lots of people from different cultures and kind of get an understanding of stories and their journeys and things like that, that they are all so much more fascinating and so much more rich than this is. And as this is a book that a lot of people are talking about being like, oh, it could be on the book a long list, I'm going, no, there is nothing interesting about this. And if you find this book interesting, and not maybe in the way it's written, not maybe in the kind of the emotional connection, that is completely subjective, but if you find the events in this novel interesting, get out more. Go talk to people more. Because it's just so dull and so bloody boring. And to repeat, because that was a bit of a harsh rant, I feel like the writing is so good and the initial idea is so good that if those gaps had been filled in or the structure had been a little bit different, then that kind of distance wouldn't have been there and I wouldn't have been so bored. Maybe the reason I'm so sort of angry about this novel is that all of the promise is there. Everything that I enjoy within a novel is there. It's just not quite executed, and a lot of the things that would have made this sort of story of her family really interesting are missing. You know, maybe Claire Messud's story is an interesting one to tell, but in the way that it's told, it is not. And I feel like the world's just going to spite me, and I feel like this is going to make it on the book a long list, and I feel like it's probably going to make it onto the short list because that's just the way things go. But honestly, I'm going to go 1.5, maybe 2 stars. I think with a bit more time to let things settle, I would go 2 stars and say this is all right. I think eventually, but I'm a bit up about it because of how much hype it's had. And yeah, in my head, I'm like, this is 1 star awful, but that's just being really mean. 2 stars. It's all right at absolute best. So have you read this very normal and not very eventful novel? Please let me know and comment below. Again, I might be in the minority here. I think I'm going to be the only one saying these things, but it is honestly my honest opinion. This is how I felt about this book. But let me know if you think I'm crazy and that I'm being too harsh in the comments below. As always, I hope you're well. I hope you're enjoying whatever you might be reading, and I'll see you all on the next one.